Hello there, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. Today's topic is electric membership co-ops and how I believe they are fairly well situated to provide broadband, especially in rural areas. They're really set up well for that, and that's what we'll discuss in just a moment. Thanks for joining me. Rick Usey with the Quorum here for Broadband Deployment News. So a lot of entities right now are rolling out broadband. They're lining up to be able to get federal funds that are coming, even if they're not in the business today. Of course, that would include your existing providers, whether those be cable companies, telephone companies, independent ISPs, WISPs, wireless internet service providers, municipalities. Some of these are providing internet now, some are getting into the business. One that is brought up a lot are electric membership co-ops, or EMCs, rural electric membership co-ops especially. So these are utilities, power companies that are providing power to these rural areas, and a lot of them are already in the business, and a lot of them are getting in the business right now, and I think a lot of them are lining up for the next round of federal funds, and they're probably looking at what they can do to help close the digital divide. And they are, again, they're pretty well situated to help do that because of some of the challenges that we have with rural areas. Because if you think about it, if you got a rural area, a lot of times you've got a city, a small city, or a town, and if you've got a state, you've got a small city, towns all spread out. In between those towns, those cities and towns, you've got vast areas where you've got not a lot of customers. It could be, just a couple of customers per mile. It could be many customers, or many miles per customer. So depending on how rural it is. But one thing that's in common generally in those areas where you've got an EMC is the EMC is covering those areas. So the EMC is providing power. So those people are actually customers of this EMC. They're actually part owners since it's a membership co-op. So again, they're pretty well situated because they're already providing service to these folks. They're also well situated because a lot of times they've been deploying fiber to connect up some of their substations, their grid, so to speak, as well as maybe different offices. So that's an advantage. They are generally not for profit, so that's an advantage. So we'll talk about some of that today. So if you're an EMC and you're watching this and you're not in the business and you do have some underserved areas in your area, unserved or underserved, then you obviously, this is something that you should look at carefully because there are funds that would be coming that would help you deploy the service. So let's take a quick look. There's a couple articles that I found interesting here. This one is in Fierce Telecom. Rural electric co-ops are the fastest growing group of broadband providers. This shows you right here that this is the group. When you look at everyone that's providing right now, these are the ones that are growing the most. Now granted, it's because there's fewer of them to start with, as opposed to, let's say, telephone companies or cable companies, but they're growing the fastest. So the NRECA, National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, CEO Jim Matheson told Fierce electric co-ops haven't always been part of the broadband equation. Back when the FCC ran its Connect America Fund program, for instance, co-ops weren't even allowed to participate, he said. So Connect America Fund, or some people call it CAF2 because it was phase 2 of that CAF funding, was what preceded RDOF, or the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. You see RDOF mentioned here in a moment. So CAF2 preceded that, and EMCs were not allowed to participate. Now, EMCs were already in the business at this point. There were some that were getting in the business, but they were not allowed to participate in this program for some reason. I don't know exactly why, because again, it's not like they didn't have the ability to be able to provide broadband. Some were already doing it. It says, after lobbying Congress and the FCC, Matheson said co-ops were allowed to bid in the RDOF Phase 1 auction in 2020 and came away with a sizable chunk of money. All told, electric co-ops won $1.6 billion, with the majority of that awarded to 180 co-ops which competed as part of 5 different consortiums. One such group, the Rural Electric Cooperative Consortium, was the third largest RDOF winner overall, walking away with $1.1 billion in winning bids. So this one consortium full of, I think that was probably the one that had like almost 100 EMCs in it, got $1.1 billion in funding. So what some of these EMCs did was, rather than try to go through this bid process, which was fairly complicated, all on their own, they put together this consortium, and I'm sure partnered with somebody who knew how to go through this bidding process, who had done it before, or something like CAF2, and then went ahead and in that consortium they won this money. Matheson said co-ops I've also successfully secured funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Reconnect program as well, and that's true. They're quite often getting funds for that. And as far as RDOF, I was just showing some ready to authorize awards yesterday in the broadcast, and there were a couple of EMCs that had won money that were just going to be getting some of the money from that latest round of funding from RDOF that's coming out. Already, Matheson said, around 200 of NRECA's 900 members have or are in the process of rolling out retail broadband. He stressed that doesn't mean that every electric co-op is going to or should go into the broadband business, especially those that serve more urban and suburban markets. There's a significant opportunity for those in rural regions, he said. So, a good example is my power here in North Atlanta is supplied by a EMC. But they don't provide internet service, and it wouldn't make any sense because I have several choices for internet here. I could get fiber, I can get, I've got Comcast, so I've got AT&T, I can get fiber, I've got Comcast, I can get Xfinity. There's probably 5G service here, I haven't checked it out. So there's several options for me. It's not needed, right? But there are these areas, like I say, where a good part of the territory is very rural, where it would make sense. It says here they're in a prime position. They already have a deep relationship with their customer owners. And again, these are customers and owners, and they've got a relationship with every single home in that territory. And because they're nonprofits, which tend to take a longer-term view of infrastructure investments, since not under pressure from shareholders, to generate short-term returns. So, and this is kind of a big deal for the funds that are coming up, because the Biden administration really would like the funds. They were not able to get this in the actual act to where they said you should prioritize not-for-profits. The most they were able to get in there was that you can't exclude anybody. So you can't exclude a city, you can't exclude an EMC. If you're going to take any of this money, you cannot exclude them from the process. But they really would, as they've said in the prior outline of the act before it passed, they were saying they wanted to prioritize not-for-profits, because part of their goal is to bring prices down. Now, obviously, if you've got a not-for-profit that's providing the service, as it says here, there's less pressure to generate a return or a profit. Now, they still want to be profitable, even though it's a not-for-profit. Not-for-profits have to make a profit, in a sense, to pay for things, but they don't have that pressure of shareholders, that kind of thing. But it's also because many co-ops already have middle-mile fiber assets they can tap for last-mile expansions to deliver broadband. So again, they've got fiber optic backbones that are running across their utility, so they've already got a lot of that in place, and they can then tap off of that to get the last mile to the end users. The government has heavily subsidized these middle mile fiber deployments. The USDA's Rural Utilities Service, Chris McLean, stated that the agency's electric program actually financed more line miles of fiber than power lines in fiscal 2020 and 2021. Last year alone, it financed 25,000 miles of fiber. The figure McLean said did not include deployments funded by the USDA's Reconnect program. So this is outside of the Reconnect program, which provides funds for broadband. The modern electric grid needs to be connected, and there's a great synergy and catalytic nature of this electric industry's investment in smart grid, with creating capacity that can also be used to spur broadband availability. So they've already got the fiber they're putting in the ground, and this is just another way to use it. Explosive growth. So Fiber Broadband Association CEO Gary Bolton told Fierce that rural electric co-ops are the fastest growing segment of broadband providers, according to FBA's data. Such providers currently deliver fiber broadband to around 675,000 homes. That figure is expected to explode to a nearly 40% compound annual growth rate to reach a total of 3.6 million over the next 5 years, he said. They're just in a very good position to be able to offer broadband because that's what they do. They serve every member of their community, so that's what differentiates them from anybody who's publicly traded. The rural electric co-op is going to cover everybody. So again, if you've got a telephone company, they're going to cover certain parts of that infrastructure, but maybe not, whole counties. You've got a cable company that might be focused on the town, outskirts of the town, but not all of the area in between the towns that you have. So again, they're in a good position, the EMCs. Bolton added that fiber is going to be deployed to modernize. Fiber that's being deployed to modernize electric grid can not only be leveraged to provide residential broadband, but also smart city services, including public safety applications, 5G, education, and rural healthcare. And the 5G part is you've got, one of the things that you need with a 5G network is you need front haul and back haul. You've got those 5G towers out there that could be, mid-band spectrum, or it could be that you're doing millimeter wave spectrum, in which case you've got even more of these towers, or not towers, but you got these small cells, and all that stuff needs to be connected back to a fiber backbone to be able to get all of that data back to the backbone, the internet. That's kind of what this is really about. It's about jobs, economic development, improving the overall quality of life, he concluded. That's what a community provider does. And again, these EMCs are community providers. They live and work and play in the communities that they serve. They can tend to be bigger areas, but still they're local and they're providing service to everybody there. And then I saw this other complimentary story here. This is actually from the NRECA website, which again is the National Rural Electric Co-op Association. So co-op forum, unexpected ways broadband deployment has impacted your co-op. So these are they just interviewed a few people at EMCs that are already providing broadband and what kind of impact has it had. And they look at several different sized providers here. So first we've got Tom Bigby Electric, Steve Foshee, Steve Foshee is the president and CEO. And actually I've talked to Steve before because we actually helped these guys get in the internet business. These guys were pioneers. They were providing internet when it was dial-up. So back in the early days, like between the mid-90s and 2000 or so, a lot of people were getting in the internet business, and these guys took the plunge and got in the dial-up internet business at that time. And they continued on that path, and then they rolled out wireless service and fiber now. And they actually were laying fiber really early as far as connecting up different points around their portion of the state, even before they started providing broadband to residential customers. So Steve says, January 2017, we launched our broadband project after studying it for over 10 years. At the time of the launch, we identified 4 key areas we hoped would improve: schools, e-medicine, economic development, and quality of life. The virus certainly had an impact, but even without this, job creation has been much better than we expected. We estimate some 1,000 jobs have been created or preserved since we launched, and is continuing to grow as people move to the country to do their jobs at home. So this was important even before the pandemic, because as people consider where they wanted to live, it's like, well, what's the quality of the internet going to be there? Even if they weren't working away from even if they weren't working at home and they were working in the office, they still want to know when they were home they could do some work and have access to entertainment and those kinds of things. So it's always been important, but especially since the pandemic. He talks about education. He said, we thought it would be younger students, but we've seen it help all students of all ages. Finally, quality of life in our communities is better. Graduates are not so eager to leave the area. Young people can game with friends all over the world. Grandparents talk to grandkids via FaceTime. Families stream their entertainment and save money. What's been amazing is the speed and breadth of this change. So they expected this, but I guess especially the last couple of years, they've seen a big change. So these guys, Tom Bigby, they're the smallest provider looked at here. So they've got 9,399 meters, and that's electric meters. That's not like metric. It's not meters as far as the metric system in comparison to miles or feet, I guess. So that's them. And then we've got Stacy Clough, Technology and Energy Services Manager at Miles Lax Energy Cooperative. That's in Aitkin, Minnesota. So they've got about 15,414 meters. So she says, our first member was connected back in December 2016, and since then we've reached another 2,500 members in our rural areas. So again, these rural areas are difficult to reach, so it's going to take them a little bit longer to get people connected up. Prior to our fiber build, our new residential electric service requests have been growing relatively slow. But this is interesting, but since we started building our fiber network, we've seen new electric services in our completed fiber areas triple in the past 3 years. So this is actually, they're connecting up more people to electric, which tells me that people are moving into the area. And also she mentioned seasonal here. She said we've had a large seasonal electric member base, being in Minnesota, and maybe it's snowbirds going down to Florida. I guess that's possible. We have a large seasonal member base, and we are seeing change here too. Members are spending more time at their cabins, so maybe the cabins are in Minnesota, so people are coming in to Minnesota. Members spending more time at their cabins, and some are even moving in permanently because they can now work remotely, along with children being able to attend online classes. Having people stay longer at their cabins has been an economic boost to both the cooperative and local businesses. We're also getting calls from real estate agents asking for verification of broadband at homes for sale. So again, having good broadband service is something that attracts people into the area, and it's going to determine whether they move into a home or not. If the particular area is not served, that's going to make a difference. We've got John Lee, President and CEO of Mecklenburg Electric Co-op, Chase City, Virginia. So they've got 31,490 meters, so we're getting bigger here. It says, our fiber to the premise deployment has sharpened the appetite and shortened the patience of our members who aren't yet served. So there's probably members that are hearing about friends that are hooked up to the EMC that are saying, wow, why can't I get this? This sounds great. So despite their understandable impatience for the service, the fact that once again we stepped up to take a critical need when no one else would has enhanced our strong bond with our membership. So EMCs do tend to have a good relationship with the customers that they serve, and this is helping. And they're elated and appreciative when they do receive our broadband offering. Many of our employees, and in particular senior management teams, have been doing double duty to both organizations for the past 2 years. The process of populating Empower Broadband with human resources and migrating fiber responsibility to that entity is promoting an unintentional but highly useful review of how we are staffed, and how we do things at the electric cooperative as well. So a lot of times, I think quite often, if not all of the time, these electric co-ops, when they do start to provide broadband, they break it off into a different brand and actually maybe a different operating company. I think the way they work is they want to make sure they don't mix things up. So you don't want the power company paying for the internet company, or vice versa, I guess. But so quite often it's two separate operating companies. I think that's what he's talking about here, is they've actually learned, and as they go through this, and they've got some people that are working at both. Lastly, our venture into the broadband realm has forced all of us to embrace competition and begin thinking outside of the traditional electric utility box. And that's something that is interesting, because even though these are not-for-profit companies, they are still operating like a for-profit company in that they have competition, right? So when you're the electric company, you don't have competition. You don't need to worry about marketing. It's like, do you want power or not? You know, if you want it, we'll turn it on. If you don't, we don't turn it on, and you don't have to pay for it. But being an EMC, they, again, are working for their customers who are members as well. So it's not like they're gouging people. But this is different. So if they may be going into the business because they've got, let's say they cover 3 counties, I don't know, and let's say one of those counties is pretty well covered, one is medium covered, and the other one is very rural and has very little coverage. They've got to provide the service to everybody generally when they do it. If they're going to get in the business, a lot of times it's like you got to be able to provide the service to everybody in that territory. So it could be that they'll have an easy time signing people up in the county where there's not much service, and they're going to have a harder time in the county where they're competing with other providers. But yet they are competing, so they could either throw up their hands and say, well, we're not going to compete, we're just going to offer it. But most of them, want to compete. They are a company that is motivated, like any other company, to try to get customers. So that's a different thing for these companies when they get into this business where they're not a monopoly, so to speak. And then we've got, this is the biggest one here. So you got Brad Gibson, the Chief Operating Business Officer at Middle Tennessee Electric. They're in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. NTE's evaluation led to the acquisition of an existing locally owned telecom company, United Communications. United had operated in our region for 70+ years and had transitioned to building out fiber and fixed wireless. Some of the early surprises were a realization of the competitive nature of broadband in portions of our footprint, and an honest internal assessment of the lack of advertising, marketing, and sales expertise required to be quickly successful. So that's just the same thing that's going on right there. So they've got some areas where there's more competition, and they have to be more on the ball as far as marketing and advertising. And what's interesting here is these guys, they got into the business by acquiring what sounds like it was probably maybe a local telephone company that was maybe providing phone service, and then also getting into the broadband business with fixed wireless and fiber. So they've acquired them, and they say, we anticipated numerous opportunities to create value between our organizations, but those occasions have been more frequent than expected. Executing on those has had impacts on the organizations, whether it's exponential demands for make-ready, leveraging IT investments, or coordinating to attract grant funding. The exponential demands for make-ready would be, so you got, let's say it's a phone company, maybe they own, maybe they've both got poles that they own, but they're able to, as they get this make-ready work, which means when you need to go out. If you're going to put a new service on a pole, you've got to go out and make sure that it's ready to accept that service, that it can handle more lines, and you've got to do that. So they've got both organizations they can draw on there, and they might have rights of way that they can draw on from both organizations, like I say, telephone poles, power poles that they can draw on from both organizations. NTE is glad to share its experience and tactics with others evaluating potential acquisition, but we stress the importance of focusing on a cultural fit above and beyond any other metric. So they mentioned that in here, that when they were looking at this acquisition, they wanted to make sure that everything fit culturally, that they just didn't acquire this company and then they'd have a hard time working together. So it sounds like they've got a good symbiotic relationship here with the company that they acquired. So they are fairly new to the business and rolling out things as quickly as possible as well, I believe. So there you go. So EMCs, again, in a great position to provide broadband. They're currently getting a significant number of them are getting funds through RDOF, and that money is being distributed right now, and there's more money that's going to be released from the FCC on RDOF, and I expect more EMCs are going to be getting that money as well. And then I know with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed recently, that the states will be obviously in contact with all the stakeholders. They have to get in contact with all the stakeholders in their state to see what the lay of the land is and who is interested in providing broadband service. And I know that EMCs are going to be raising their hand there as well. And again, they're in a good position to be able to take advantage of that because of the fact that they cover so much territory. They've got this customer relationship already set up with the customer. They tend to be in rural areas, and being not-for-profit, they're going to be able to provide the service maybe at less of a cost than a for-profit company that comes in and tries to do the same thing. So we'll be continuing to see EMCs, as the president of the FBA mentioned. There's going to be explosive growth here over the next couple of years, especially with this new funding that comes out. Thanks for joining me. Go ahead and like this video if you did like it, and click subscribe and ring the little bell. You'll be notified when I'm live, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.